In this video, we'll discuss the different auto-scaling and serverless options available in AWS. We'll compare the services against each other to help you decide which would best fit your requirements. Before we jump in, let me give you a quick mental model that will make everything easier to understand, as it's easy to get lost in all the acronyms. The first concept you need to keep in mind is the scale of simplicity versus flexibility. On one end, you have services that are simpler but less flexible in configuration. On the other end, you have services that have a higher degree of complexity but with greater control over configuration. The second thing you need to keep in mind is that there are two groups of AWS services at play here. The first group is container orchestration services. So this is basically like Kubernetes. Services that belong in this category are EKS and ECS. That stands for Elastic Kubernetes Service and Elastic Container Service. In this context, you can think of Elastic as being analogous to auto-scaling. This implies an orchestration service. The second group is the compute engine group. So this would be like the worker nodes in Kubernetes. EC2 is an example in this category, which would be classified as a non-serverless compute engine. Fargate is another example, which is essentially a serverless compute engine. Lambda also belongs in this category. Now that we've set up the framework to understand everything easier, let's jump into the first service we'll be discussing. On the scale of simplicity versus flexibility, Lambda is the most simple in architecture, but least flexible in configuration. You're able to control auto-scaling behavior by supplying one simple number through the concurrency limit option. Lambda is also event-driven and serverless. So, with it being event-driven, it means that this could be used as triggers in your architecture. In other words, you can set up triggers in your infrastructure that invoke your Lambda when something specific happens in your infrastructure, such as when your infrastructure is deployed. A limitation of it being event-driven is that it comes with a hard limit of 15 minutes to execute your code. So a Lambda wouldn't be suitable for long-running tasks. Next, we'll look at ECS and Fargate. ECS is a container orchestration service which can be thought of like Kubernetes. If you need greater control over your auto-scaling behavior than Lambda, you can look to ECS. You have the choice of executing your containers as serverless or non-serverless. If you choose non-serverless, that means you'll be using EC2 instances as the compute engine. If you choose serverless, this means you will be using Fargate as the compute engine. Remember, Fargate is just a serverless compute engine. Finally, we move on to EKS, which stands for Elastic Kubernetes Service. Under the hood, EKS uses Kubernetes for container orchestration, but parts of it are abstracted away, which make it simpler to use. An example of a component that's abstracted away is the control plane. It also does a lot of heavy lifting when it comes to integration with other AWS services. It can also benefit from the open source Kubernetes community through integrations. EKS gives you the highest flexibility but comes with the highest complexity. EKS can launch your containers as EC2 instances or as serverless with Fargate. So ECS and EKS share that similarity. As mentioned, Fargate makes it simpler to define your compute engine because you're basically just providing CPU and memory constraints. If you require more granular control, you can launch with EC2 instead. So to summarize the whole video, remember to keep in mind the scale of simplicity versus flexibility and where you lie on that scale based on your requirements. Also remember the two groups of services, container orchestrators and compute engines. This will help you avoid getting lost in the acronyms. Please subscribe if you found this helpful and have a nice day.